All right, everyone. So last year I got a bit of a taste of visual astronomy, like, using some of my eyepieces over here and stuff. And, because I've got all my equipment set up for astrophotography, I wanted to get something where I can just use it for visual and actually, mainly, to be honest, for looking at things like, the moon, just wanting to go out on an evening and look at the moon, maybe look at, one of the big globular clusters, that kind of thing. And of course, the planets is always nice, but I am always reluctant to break down my astrophotography rigs. So that's why I've got this scope. So let's get it out of the box and have a look at it. I'm not going to do the whole unboxing thing because that's just boring. So let's get it out of the box and have a look at it. Okay, so it is out of the box now. But the first thing that struck me, so before we just have a quick look at what we get with this thing, I just wanted to point out, because the box was much bigger than the actual telescope. Obviously, you had the accessories and then you got the telescope as well. But I just wanted to point out, the size of this thing is, it's much smaller than I expected. So this is the Skymax, the Skywatcher Skymax 127. 1500 millimeters, I think. I'm not positive, but I think it runs at f12. But yeah, it is I think it's 3-ish kilos, maybe a little bit more than 3 kilos, but very light and compact. And just for reference, I just wanted to put my C925 on the table. So obviously, this natively is a much longer. It's a fair bit longer. It's, about 2,300 natively, the C925. And of course, I have this all set up for astrophotography at the moment. So it weighs quite a bit, as well as the 9 kilos in the scope itself. But it's just interesting to see the focal length of these things, given the size of them. So obviously, 1,500 millimeters, if you had that in a refractor, it'd be massive. And yeah, so the only other designs really that you normally get this kind of focal length in is, usually more the Schmidt-Cassegrains. I think the Celestron C6 is about 1,500. I'm not positive. It might be a little bit more. But I'm imagining it would be a little bit heavier than this as well. So this is a really nice little compact unit. Now, obviously, just to explain the main difference, they're both Cassegrains, but this is a Maxitov Cassegrain, and the main difference is this kind of corrector plate here at the front. I think it's referred to as, the meniscus, is this huge piece of glass at the front of these Maxitovs, which has kind of got this dished in effect to it. Unlike the Schmidt-Cassegrains, where the glass looks almost, flat. So at least aesthetically, appearance-wise, that's the kind of the main difference between the two. Of course, the principle remains the same of the light coming in, bouncing off the mirror at the back, bouncing off the front mirror, this little central obstruction here, and then back through into the eyepiece or the camera or whatever. I do know that one of the advantages of these Maxitovs is that they are pretty well corrected compared to a Schmidt, and also they give really good contrast as well. So you can probably notice the central obstruction that we have at the front of this one. It's actually quite a bit smaller than you get on the Schmidt-Cassegrains. I think on the Schmidts it's more like about this central obstruction here that you see with the mirror in it. It's more like about 30%, something along those lines. I think on these it's more like about 20-something percent, 25%. Doesn't sound like much, but I know that it helps with really good contrast in these images. So anyway, I just wanted to do that as a quick comparison so you can have a look at the two there, because it's quite it's quite a difference. But let's move on now and actually have a look at the Skymax 127 and why I even bothered, why I wanted to even go for this telescope, to be honest. All right, guys, so here we go. We've got it out of the box now, and you know, let's have a bit of a look at what we actually get with the telescope. So like I said, we know now it's a Skywatcher Skymax 127. Just to note, there is also a 102 version of this, which I think is probably about 1250 millimeters in focal length. But again, you know, I think that thing's only like 1.5 kilos or something really light. So, and it's extremely affordable as well. I think that may only be $300 or something like that. But whilst these are a kind of a more specialized niche telescope, you know, they are very affordable, and if one of your main interests is lunar, and maybe looking at the planets, so looking at the moon and the planets, this could be, you know, often people have these in their sort of telescope collections to fill a niche of, like, you know, maybe lunar photography and especially planetary photography, that kind of thing, bright objects, you know, because they're particularly, they have really good, they're well corrected and they have really good contrast, so they're very good for those kind of things. And even though they're slow at f12, it doesn't really matter when you're on objects that bright. So let's just have a quick look anyway. Like I said, there's a bunch of these. This is the 127 version, about 3 kilos in terms of weight, not very heavy at all. Yeah, I mean, really manageable. You got this Vixen, you got this little Vixen bar here, which I'm glad to see is not too short. Anyway, sometimes you get these really, really tiny. You get that kind of typical Skywatcher black, kind of, what do they call it, like an anodized-y sort of finish. You know, the front, as we've already looked at, has got your curved, sort of curved meniscus corrector plate there. On the back here, you've really got this finder bracket here, you know, pretty standard. Got your little focusing knob here. You've got your 2-inch back, which is nice. I think with the, I have a feeling that with the version down from this, the 102, I think you only get the 1.25 back on it. So that's pretty much it there. Now there are some screws here at the back, so I do believe there's some sort of push and pull screws here, so I do believe that you can change the collimation on the primary mirror if you need to. Although, from what I hear, these hold collimation really well, so I don't really know if that's going to be particularly necessary. Yeah, and in terms of our accessories then, what have we got here? We've got a pretty, you know, pretty cheap, you know, typical sort of cheap 6x30 plastic finder scope, which is actually very similar to the finder scope on my Celestron that came with the Celestron C925. It'll do the job for now, you know, you could always replace this if you wanted to, but that would fit in there. And obviously the first job is probably just to take this out during the day, get your finder scope aligned with your main scope. Use something like a, you know, a tree or a lamppost in the distance, and just use these little push and pull screws here to get that aligned. So it is actually quite a big, kind of juts out quite a long way, that, compared to the size of the scope. Now that is actually my own 2-inch diagonal, but you do get this 2-inch diagonal that comes with the telescope here. It doesn't feel too bad, in all honesty. There's no sort of branding on it, but it doesn't feel too bad. So obviously, you know, so there's no compression ring on this 2-inch here back. It's just a couple of grub screws, and obviously that's going to go in there. Hopefully, let's back these off a little bit. There we go. So yeah, that's where that would fit. All right, and finally we get this little 28mm, well, it's actually quite a big eyepiece. It's a 2-inch eyepiece. It's got a fairly long eye relief on it. And this is actually the same eyepiece. I'm pretty sure this is exactly the same eyepiece that you get with the Esprit 120 that I had, which I no longer have. But basically, yeah, and there you go. So I know this is a modified Kellner design. It's not a bad eyepiece actually. It's 28mm, so it's quite nice and wide, which will be, you know, probably good for viewing the moon and things like that. It's you know, it's a nice eyepiece to. It's an okay eyepiece to get you started. It's not like a really cheap one or anything. And of course, on here they do have, on this diagonal, they also have this little 1 1/4, which would be good for my eyepieces, because I've got these. I've actually got these Hyperion eyepieces, which actually, come to think of it now, you can have as a 1 1/4 or a 2-inch. So I've got a 13mm Baader Hyperion, and I've got a 25mm Baader Hyperion. So they're one of the reasons that I got this scope. So, you know, that's basically the telescope. Let's now have a look at, or let's have a think about, well, why did you even get this telescope, Ollie? You're an astrophotographer. Why the hell do you want to, why do you want to do visual? And that's really the point. I really wanted a telescope where I could concentrate on doing some visual astronomy with my eyes. We all know as astrophotographers, we get a bit caught up in, or I do at least, I get a bit caught up behind the computer sometimes. And there's been many a night where I thought, oh, you know, I'd just like to go outside and look at the moon tonight. It's been a nice big full moon, but I'm like, oh, I don't really want to take apart my imaging train to put an eyepiece in, to put the diagonal in, and then change focus and blah, blah, blah. And that's what got me looking around and trying to work out what kind of telescope would I like for just doing visual with. And I wanted something that was small and compact, so this Skymax 127 ticked the boxes there. I did want something that was mainly going to be, really for me, imaging or looking at the moon, looking at maybe the planets at certain times of the year, obviously, and, you know, a few really bright objects like those globular clusters that are out there. And that's why, you know, even though this is a slow telescope around f12, that didn't really bother me, because I'm really wanting this for those bright objects. You know, you never get, for me at least, I never get bored looking at the moon. So I just wanted something that I can take outside. I'm going to mount this on the HEQ5 Pro mount, which will be fine for the weight, considering the weight of this telescope, more than enough for this. In fact, you know, that's a good aside, is that I've actually seen these 127s. I believe they come as a kit. You can get them on little computerized alt-as mounts fairly inexpensively. I think around $700, $800 as a package, something like that. And I've also seen these on the little AZ GTI mounts as well. So they because they're so light as a telescope, they actually come on fairly light mounts. Now, you know, like I said, I'll be putting this on the HEQ5, which is good in a way because I know it's going to be nice and steady, but you can put it on definitely a lighter mount than that. All right, guys, so that's pretty much, you know, that's pretty much an overview of the telescope and why I decided to purchase this particular model and this particular telescope design. The only two real upgrades that I'm looking at to begin with, and one of them's not really an upgrade, is, like I said, I do want to keep this primarily for visual. So I wanted a decent quality diagonal on it, which is, you know, high reflectivity. So I have invested at least in this William Optics diagonal. It's got a really high reflectivity rate. It's a dielectric one, so, you know, really high reflectivity. So I really want to maximize the design of this telescope and get those really nice high contrast images. So, you know, I'll have that in. And of course, we all know I'm not going to be able to resist the odd image. So for those brighter objects like the moon and those globular clusters and probably the planet at some point when they're around again next year, I'll be looking at, you know, just giving it a quick test, with the old planetary camera here, and I can give you guys some feedback on what those images come out like. So without further ado, guys, that is pretty much our first look at the little Skymax 127. Stay tuned to my channel, and I will put out a video of my first session using this scope, just so we can get a feel for what the images are like visually, and then I'll also chuck in a little camera like this, and we can get an idea again of just what it's like in terms of imaging the moon and that type of thing. So thanks as always for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.